Political parties are racing against time to form coalitions in hung municipalities. According to the Municipal Structures Act, they must be convened 14 days after the declaration of local government elections. So it's 14 days, not 21. The results were officially declared on the 4th of November. To find out the latest about the coalition talks, I am now joined by the DA's Cilliers Brink. Thank you so much for joining me, Mr. Brink. So give me a lay of the land. Where are you, on the verge of forming coalitions, and where do you believe you still have quite some work to do?
Well, I think there's a number of municipalities that require quite some work. One coalition agreement has already been formed in the Cilliers municipality, which includes Citrusdal and the west coast of the Western Cape. But there are a number of municipalities, including the metros, that still require quite a lot of work. Now, I know that there might be some concern in the sense that people might feel that this takes a lot of time. But our approach as the DA to all of this is that it is better to thrash out these agreements properly, make sure that there is actually consensus on the fundamental values and the policies that these municipalities under coalition governments will pursue before just rushing in and then risking disappointing a lot of people and further destroying the trust that has already been compromised clearly if we look at the turnout at elections. So we want to form coalitions that govern well, that govern better than the previous governments that were in place, not just looking at the communities concerned, at the municipalities concerned, but also looking at 2024, the next general election, when the DA expects that the ANC will lose its majority at national level as well. So these agreements need time, and I expect that we will take, in certain instances, the full time to make sure that the coalition agreements are in place.
So tell me about your negotiations. Which parties are you engaging with? Because I believe you've been very clear on a few political parties that you've said you're simply not willing to work with, those being the EFF and the ANC. But I do believe you've been engaging quite extensively with Action SA. How's that going?
Yes, there has been engagements with Action SA. Obviously, you know that Action SA is a factor in some of the metros where it is possible to form a coalition governments. But it's very important to note that the DA is not going to go into coalitions where we cannot form with our coalition partners at least a majority government. That is a 50% plus one government. So that's a principle that will direct our approach to the negotiations. And so we're talking to Action SA, the Freedom Front Plus, obviously, COPE, the IFP, all manner of other parties in the Western Cape. There are various smaller parties, such as the Cilliers First Residents Association that we've just concluded an agreement with in Cilliers. So, aside from what you've just mentioned, no going into coalitions with the ANC and the EFF, we are pretty much talking to everybody who we believe can, in terms of a solid coalition agreement, share or at least share some of our fundamental values and that we can form an effective government with. So it's very difficult, quite honestly, to give you a blow-by-blow on each of the negotiations because we want to negotiate with other parties in good faith. I don't want to say things here that are not being said at the negotiating table or to preempt issues that might be solved there. But I think it's important to give the assurance to South Africans that these coalition agreements, once concluded, will be transparent. They'll be open to the public. They'll be open to public perusal. And to the public holding us to account to the provisions in those agreements.
So in terms of the implications for the big metros, because, your strategy has been, Mr. Brink, as the DA, to incrementally introduce DA governance in various areas. I suppose you were working from where you initially governed in the Western Cape and in Cape Town, and the metros gave you an opportunity to showcase what you can do when you lead a government. How optimistic are you that you will be able to at least retain the lead role in coalition arrangements in at least one of the metros, one of the 5 that are now, hung metros?
So we are quite optimistic, but let me just latch on to something that you've just mentioned, the metros outside of the Western Cape. And I think the DA has learned very valuable lessons in constituting coalition governments in those metros after 2016. And the most important of the lessons is that coalitions that don't have a 50% plus 1 majority in the municipal council concerned are unstable, they are fragile, and they are prone to power grabs and disruptions by the old regime, the ANC, with the help of the EFF. And so I think that many of our attempts after 2016 in these metros were not as successful as we had hoped, exactly because those governments didn't have a clear mandate. They were unstable, they were fragile. And so that is exactly what we would want to avoid. But I do want to say that we are optimistic that, as you mentioned, at least one of the metros, maybe more, will be able to form a coalition government with a 50% plus 1 majority that won't live from council meeting to council meeting, that will have a clear sense of the policies that need to be implemented, and that will have the ability to appoint the right officials, to take disciplinary action against officials who breach the code of conduct, to pass budgets and IDPs, and to conduct the business of government and to get things done in the interests of citizens without compromising on principles.
So given what you've said in public about the potential to work with the ANC, outright rejecting it, does that put paid to what many were suggesting, some were suggesting, let me say, or the possibilities of super coalitions where, your numbers look almost identical between yourselves and the ANC, that perhaps the most sensible thing to form a stable government would be for you to talk to the ANC and form some kind of a governing situation there. So there's no conversation at all between yourselves and the ANC?
Well, let me just say that the DA has said before there are good people inside the ANC. There are good people who broadly share the DA's liberal democratic principles. The problem is that those people aren't making the decisions in the ANC. And we can only take hands with those people once they leave the ANC, or once the ANC breaks up into parties who do share broadly the DA's vision and values. So it's very difficult to say we want to change a particular place, we want to end cadre deployment, we want to prioritize basic services, if the partner at the decision-making table is the very party that is responsible for the breakdown of services, for cadre deployment as a policy, and so forth. It's just the DA cannot, in all honesty, tell the people who voted for us, who voted for change or continued progress, that will be able to fulfill that mandate by taking hands with the ANC. So yes, ANC Grand Coalition is off the table. The DA Federal Executive has already taken that resolution. And where we cannot form stable, effective coalition governments with parties who share our values, the DA is prepared to go back to opposition. It's a job that we've done well in many places. And to wait until the next opportunity to get a clear mandate to govern.
And so just give me the path forward then, Mr. Brink. What does it look like? Which parties are you yet to engage with in the coming days? Also given the fact that, the clock is ticking in terms of the requirements of the law for these municipal councils to be constituted within that stipulated time frame.
So a lot of the work has already been done. The DA briefed our attorneys even before the election to put together a draft template coalition agreement, and that forms the basis of our discussion with each and every party, whether it's other opposition parties that are represented already in Parliament at national level, or new parties such as Action SA, or community organizations that managed to do well in this election. So that is the basis for our discussion. We have engaged all of the parties that we are willing to explore a coalition relationship with, and negotiations are ongoing. As you know, there are more than 60 hung councils across the country. So it's really not just one group of people sitting and meeting with the other side in respect of each caucus. There are various teams, and the important thing is the preparation was done. There is a clear mandate. We know what our red lines are, our non-negotiables, and that makes it easy to make compromises on the non-essential things. So in the week ahead, negotiations with potential coalition partners in the metros will go ahead, and hopefully the DA and other parties will be in a position to give clearer reports on the progress of those negotiations. But I do want to emphasize that to rush into these things without proper agreement on the fundamentals of policy and of principle is a major risk, not just to the DA, who will end up carrying the can for unstable and ineffective governments, because we are the second largest party and will be the senior partner in most of these coalitions, but also for the country at large. We have to make sure that coalitions don't get a bad rap after these elections, because coalitions are probably going to be the reality of how South Africa is governed after 2024.
All right, we'll touch base with you hopefully at the conclusion of those negotiations. Thank you for giving us the outlines of what the conversations are like. Of course, without giving as much detail as we would have liked, Mr. Cilliers Brink there from the Democratic Alliance, giving us a sense of the conversations that have already happened, the conversations that will absolutely not happen, and the conversations that are likely to happen in the coming days towards trying to form coalition governments in hung municipalities, about 66 of them, including 5 metros in the country.